I had always loved the night sky, be it for the twinkling light of the stars, the clever smile of the crescent moon, or that every night my mother would tell me stories as we gazed upon them together. She would bundle me up in my favorite blue blanket only to hold me hostage, smothering me with kisses and tickling my stomach until I nearly cried tears of laughter. We would sit together for what felt like hours as she spun her tales, retold stories she had been told by her own mother. Even in old age, she uses the same unserious voices she had used on those nights so long ago. It was on a night just like those nights before that my mother had spoken of wishing stars. With her arms stretched towards the sky, she pointed to the plethora of stars, explaining that there were few that watched us from the vast darkness of the night. Watching and listening for children pure of heart, she said that if you listen closely, you could hear them giggling at one another, as we dream of our innermost desires and fantasies. It was then that we saw it. Only for a brief moment did it leave its trail of starlight, but long enough that I was able to squeeze my eyes tightly shut and make my wish. I wish for a friend. After we had finished our nightly procrastination, our stories concluded, and our laughter subsided. She lifted me up in one swift swoop, at which I giggled and melted into her embrace. Just before my body met with the bed, she would gently drop me onto the mattress, toppling over me, claiming I was so much more comfortable than any mattress she had used. Dragging out the vowel as I attempted to shove her off of me, I groaned. "Moon, you have your own bed, not me." She chuckled as she brought her face to my own, first to rub her nose to mine, only to kiss my forehead as she tucked me in. Before I could even think to run it away, she gave me that look. "Are you really going to wipe away my love for you look?" I simply shook my head as I covered the lower half of my face with the blanket to hide my smile. "I love you," I whispered through the fabric. Leaning against the frame of my door, she returned the smile I tried so hard to hide. "I love you most." My eyelids were so heavy, I swear I had already fallen asleep before she had turned off the lights and shut the door. My eyes fluttered open, my eyelids still heavy. I hadn't been asleep very long. My stomach churned as the same sound that had woken me resumed. A low, uncanny whispering followed by the prolonged tapping of glass. Tap. 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 My body went stiff as the final tap had become a deafening sound that I could only describe as similar to nails on a chalkboard. I'm surprised I had made it out of my bed without my legs giving out. My body trembled with every step. The whispering grew louder as I hesitantly shifted towards the windowsill. My palms had felt clammy as they gripped onto the thick fabric of my curtains. A light shone through each crease. Every entrance it could seep through it had done so. My heart nearly left my chest. It had been beating so harshly as the coldness of the air nipped at my skin. It hadn't been so cold earlier, had it? My mind raced with questions, my breath rigid and my mouth dry. As if to wake me once more, a single tap echoed against the walls of my bedroom. Why did I open the curtains? Why hadn't I simply fallen back to sleep when I had first woken up? Questions I ponder even now. The curiosity of a child is not so easily tainted, not even when met with an unsettling fear of the unknown. Swallowing that very fear, I had nearly taken down the curtains as I ripped them open, unprepared for what I may have found, but so eager, so determined to vanquish whatever may be waiting for me. There, standing in the moonlight, was a creature unlike anything I had ever seen. Its skin was void of color, an empty blackness that blended into the darkness of the night, sickly thin and sleek beneath the light. Each and every part of its body seemed disproportionate and disfigured, from its neck to its spindly limbs that seemed to stretch forever. But the most terrifying part was its face, or rather where its face should have been. What had been instead was unmistakably a star. Though not like any star I had seen while Mother told her stories. No, this star was grim and grotesque. Each edge was uneven and sharp. Its light felt sinister as it gave off an unsettling cold. What would be its face consisted of two unblinking eyes, a sharp, pointed nose, and a perverse smile that had stretched to be unnaturally wide, almost as if splitting the star-like head into two. Its lips were thin and cracked, revealing uneven and jagged teeth. My lips parted as if to scream, but no sound came out. My body betrayed me as it fell to the once comforting carpet of my floor. Each fiber had felt like needles to the touch against my near-frozen skin. Oh, how I wanted to look away, to scream and to cry, and yet all I could do was look. I had never known a smile that could invoke such raw terror as this, nor eyes so eerie. The creature moved closer, its limbs bending and twisting in unnatural ways. I watched, unmoving, as the darkness rippled around its arm that had reached for the window, teasingly dragging its fingertips along the pane before its needle-like claws had wedged it open. "Come, play with me," it whispered like the rustling of leaves. I felt all the warmth leave my body as it crept closer. I shook my head, dragging my body away from the window. Yet the creature did not stop. My voice had yet to return, caught in the back of my throat. The hairs of my arms stood tall as goosebumps ran along my skin. It had climbed through the window, its body and limbs stretching and contorting to fit through and into such a small space. Its face shone brighter to fill the darkness of the room. "Don't be afraid, little one." The stinging chill of its presence settled, and its smile seemingly softened. "You wished for a friend, did you not?" I nodded as tears began to stream down my face. This wasn't what I had asked for. I wished for a friend, not a monster. The creature lifted a single claw to my cheek, wiping away my tears while staring down upon me with that wicked smile. Stretching its neck over my fear-stricken body, I felt myself being effortlessly lifted. It placed me back in bed, petting my hair with that very same claw, before retreating to the foot of my bed. "Do not fret. Friends do not make friends cry. And we shall be friends for a very long time." That night I had closed my eyes, hoping for it all to be but a dream, a horrible dream. But each and every night since, I felt its gaze, its very presence, as its smile widened. Never once did it speak, but it watched as I slept, as I dreamt and grew. It would stare as I grew distant from my mother, who had once told me stories that her mother had once told her. Never again would I wish upon a star, for the friend I've been given reminds me of what happens when I do. October 31, 1974, Piotr and Janek Tarkowski, American-born sons of Polish immigrants, ran through the woods just west of Germantown, Pennsylvania. The elementary school-age boys enjoyed the thick-treed wooded area not far from their modest suburban Philadelphia home. They knew the area like the back of their hands from playing in the woods daily before dinner. "Race you to the waterfall," cried out the 9-year-old Piotr as his 7-year-old younger brother tried hard to keep up. "No fair, Piotr," replied young Janek. "You got a head start." Nevertheless, Janek followed his older brother as fast as he could. The boys' sneakers could be heard slipping and sliding on the wet leaves as they ran down the path toward an 18-foot modest waterfall, which led to the small local creek that ran through the woods. Both were huffing and puffing as they reached the waterfall, but neither would slow down. Pride ran deep in the Tarkowski family, and each dreaded the thought of being the loser in any competition that was held. The older Piotr reached the edge of the waterfall first and raised his arms in triumph as he went to stop just feet from the edge of the cliff. But wet leaves on the ground took away his footing, and the 9-year stumbled to the ground. Grabbing a small tree just 3 feet from the edge allowed Piotr to stop his forward momentum. Janek was not as lucky. Trying to stop, Janek slipped and slid toward the edge of the cliff. Piotr screamed out and extended his arm in an effort to catch his younger brother. But it was all in vain. Janek slid off the edge and headed downward to the rocky creek below. Janek. Piotr scrambled to his knees as he moved to the edge of the small falls. On the ground below, he could see the body of his brother lying in a contorted position with his left leg twisted 90 degrees from its natural orientation. Janek's head was lying against a large boulder near the base of the falls, and the boy was completely motionless. Janek. Piotr called out several times, hoping that his brother would move or somehow acknowledge the yells. But the boy continued to just lie on the ground. Fearing the worst, Piotr descended the cliff and headed toward the creek, all along being careful about the wet conditions in the wood. Soon he reached the bottom and moved briskly toward the body of his brother. From a distance, he could see a light gray mist now covering the area where the body was laying. The mist seemed an oddity given the relative warmth of the fall afternoon. But Piotr didn't have time to consider it. He had to reach his brother. After following the twisted creek path, Piotr finally reached the bottom of the falls and Janek's motionless body. He moved toward the body but stopped in a lurch. Standing next to Janek was a large gray dog, appearing to almost be guarding the body. As Piotr continued to move toward Janek, the dog raised his head. Piotr gasped as he realized that the animal was not a dog, but rather a gray-colored wolf. The animal seemed almost inquisitive as it looked at Piotr. Then, in an instant, the wolf took to flight, heading down the creek and into the woods. Piotr stared at the animal as it ran away and then immediately went to the side of his brother. Janek was unresponsive and his body was already cold to the touch. Piotr screamed for help, not giving up until adults from the area finally came to his aid. But paramedics could do nothing for the young boy as his grieving parents and brother looked on. October 31, 1994. 29-year-old Piotr Tarkowski looked up from the Germantown Gazette and wondered. The article in the paper was just like previous ones from 1979, 1984, and 1989. Every 5 years on the exact same date, a young boy had been found alongside the Cresheim Creek not far from a modest waterfall that partially fed the Wissahickon Valley waterways. Always occurring on October 31st, local authorities had been questioning whether the unexplained deaths might have been from a serial killer living around the Germantown area. Authorities were cautioning people to stay away from the Wissahickon Valley area with Halloween once again coming. The police promised to patrol the area in hopes of stopping the deaths. Piotr rubbed his eyes and contemplated the article. He wondered about the first strange death when it had occurred on October 31, 1979. The young boy was just slightly older than Janek was at the time of his death. But 14-year-old Piotr wrote off the death as being a coincidence. But then another came in October 31, 1984. The second death was similar to the first one. And then there was the death in October 1989. The pattern was too specific to ignore, but while the authorities searched in vain for a serial killer, Piotr pondered the unthinkable. As October 31, 1994 came, Piotr decided that he had to address his nagging suspicions. He drove to his old neighborhood and parked next to his family home. With the death of his parents in 1990, the family home was now owned by a young family very much like the Tarkowskis. Piotr paused as he looked at his old home, knowing that the young children now living there could be at risk. Tears came down his cheeks as he thought about how much he had lost. His brother and his parents. After a few moments, Piotr headed for the woods. The path leading into the heavily wooded area looked the same as when Janek and he had played there 20 years ago. Inside the woods, he could hear police patrolling Cresheim Creek. He stopped at the top of the waterfall while police moved downstream further into the woods. He checked his watch. It was 4:15 p.m., close to the time when Janek had passed away just 20 years earlier. Piotr slowly descended from the top of the waterfall to the creek below. He headed left, and in a short time he reached it. The location where Janek's body had laid back in October 1974. Tears came down Piotr's cheeks as he looked at the large rock that had crushed Janek's small head. The guilt of that day came back, and Piotr felt embarrassed. Couldn't he have done more? Rustling came from the woods adjacent to the creek bed as a gray wolf appeared. The wolf looked at Piotr and growled. Sharp teeth were visible in the mouth of the animal. But Piotr didn't run. Instead, he stood his ground and spoke to the animal. "Janek, it's me. "Piotr, I have come to talk to you." The animal stopped growling but continued to look menacingly at Piotr. The animal's eyes looked intently at the young man. "I know that you have been killing the young boys along this creek. I know you are doing it out of frustration and revenge over your life being taken so young. But this has to stop. They are innocent and don't deserve this. Just as you never deserve to die." The wolf growled again, but much less intensively. The animal looked away from Piotr as if it were unwilling to look into his eyes. Piotr's eyes were fixated on the wolf as he continued his one-sided dialogue. "If you don't let go of this anger, you will never have peace. You are better than this. Mom and Dad mourned you for years before they died. I have too." The wolf hung its head and whined. Piotr was convinced that the animal had to be Janek. But was he getting through to him? Let go of this anger. Mom and Dad are calling for you. Go to them and find peace. As the wolf looked at the large rock in the creek, the one that had caused Janek's death in 1974, its color started to change. The gray fur on the animal turned lighter and lighter as it eventually reached a pure white color. And above the animal, a light gray mist formed, just like the mist seen by Piotr in 1974. The animal looked up, shook its head, and then took off into the woods. Piotr shivered as he watched the animal run off. Had he convinced Janek to search for the peace that he had never allowed himself to have? Piotr wasn't sure. As Piotr climbed up the cliff and back to the edge of the waterfall, he looked off into the distance, searching for a glimpse of the wolf. But to his surprise, he saw instead a rainbow over the creek bed below. Epilogue: the Cresheim creek killings stopped in 1994 and no additional occurrences ever took place. The Germantown police keep the case file open as part of standard practice, but as time passed, they would eventually close it. In 2012, the case was finally closed as an unsolved mystery. Piotr Tarkowski eventually moved from the Philadelphia area, taking up residence in Colorado as a freelance writer. He enjoyed the Rocky Mountains and hiked the area often, and whenever he would see a gray wolf, he would pause to wonder whether Janek was finally at peace. On several occasions, he saw a rainbow over top of the animal, and he suspected that he knew the answer.